Hello there guys, how are all of you doing? Welcome, of course, back to Rule of Two Review, and today I'm going to do something that, like I mentioned recently, I don't typically do, and I'm going to discuss a couple of things in one video. It's not something that I think anyone should look forward to me doing on a regular basis. I used to try to do sort of a week in review thing every once in a while, and I realized it's not something that I should do, and typically people don't get too into it, at least coming from me and Rule of Two Review. However, I'm about a week late on the Nintendo news front. As you guys know, I discussed that in the last video as well, and there's been a bunch of really cool things happening over the course of the last week, and I was like, you know what, I could make all of these separate videos, but I just don't really have the time to do that, and it would just sort of be kind of silly, I think, to do that. Why not just put it all into one video? So we're just going to get right into a bunch of Nintendo news. So again, I will of course remind you guys, I'm several days late to the party on most of these stories, but that doesn't mean that it's not still interesting to talk about, and they're all very recent and recently breaking. So I'm pretty excited to kind of throw my 2 cents into the ring with a lot of what's happening here. The first thing I want to discuss is within the last couple of days, some folks at Square Enix decided to talk about how much they really enjoy the Nintendo Switch and how much they want to start seeing a lot more of their games come to the console, which I thought was pretty interesting news. Most immediately, there was a quote from Square Enix president whose name is Yosuke Matsuda. I'm sure I said that right, at least I hope I did. And he said an interesting quote: in addition to developing new titles for the Switch, he hopes to see more of Square Enix's existing titles get ports wherever it's possible. So that's interesting because it's not so much saying that for sure we have specific titles or a title that we want to bring to the Switch. It's more stating that he and Square really see the Switch as a viable option for a lot of their games. They've been fairly strong and present as far as a developer willing to make titles available on the Switch. Launch-wise, I know that I think worldwide I Am Setsuna was a launch title for the Switch on the eShop from Square. And then, of course, the Dragon Quest Heroes, which is like, I think 2 different Dragon Quest games in one package, was available on the Japanese eShop. And, of course, a lot of people started making Japanese accounts to be able to download that. And I also heard that really the quality of the game wasn't that good, but it was still a pretty big deal. The biggest thing, of course, is that Dragon Quest 10 and 11 are going to be coming to the Nintendo Switch as well. And if you can't tell, I don't really know a whole heck of a lot about the Dragon Quest series. I've never played a game. I do think it's great that it's so popular, and I appreciate a quality JRPG, although I don't really play them very often, I have to admit. What's really neat about that is that, of course, Dragon Quest XI is like the newest, freshest, most relevant of all the Dragon Quest games, and there's a PlayStation 4, a 3DS, and a Switch version of the game, and I believe that they're all supposed to be somewhat different to a degree, or at least that 3DS version is going to do a bunch of really crazy but cool stuff. So they're obviously supporting the Switch fairly heavily for one of the bigger Japanese third-party developers, and that's really cool to see. When it comes to these recent quotes and some more stories and quotes that have been coming out of Square discussing the Switch, they basically are saying, hey, we like the Switch, we want to bring more titles to the Switch, more future titles, and they kind of, in a weird sort of nebulous way, kind of make it sound like some of their current titles they might be considering porting over to the Switch or wanting to find a viable way to do that, which more than likely for most of us makes us immediately think of Final Fantasy 15, and I know I would love to see that game come to the Switch. I have totally missed that game. I didn't get to pick it up when it came out in November. I've wanted to go back and play it. I know it's a very great game, and I could pick it up on my PS4, Xbox One, but it's like I don't really want to go into that back catalog just yet. But if a brand new version came out for the Switch that I could play portable, that could potentially change the game, and suddenly that's the version of the game that I'm willing to pick up. And I'm just one person. I think a lot of people might actually say that. So at the end of the day, I think it's just really interesting to see Square being so vocal about how much they want to support the Switch. I like seeing a big, high-profile third-party developer talking about the Switch. They are a fellow Japanese company alongside of Nintendo. Through this, they even recently said that they're really not that interested in what they know about the Scorpio, but that they're just far more interested in the Switch. So we know they're seeing success with Sony and the PlayStation 4. They want to continue success with the Switch. Not so much interested in the Scorpio, so they're kind of sort of drawing a line in the sand, so to speak, in a nice way. They're not like talking major crap to the Scorpio or to Microsoft, but they're basically saying, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, not interested. But these Sony and Nintendo guys and this Switchness, that's pretty exciting. So the other pretty cool piece of news that came out the last day or so that I really wanted to discuss with you guys is news that Blizzard might sort of, kind of, maybe a little bit be hinting at having some kind of interest in bringing Overwatch to the Nintendo Switch. Now, Overwatch, we all know the game. It's a huge deal. Everyone who's played it loves it. I tried it in the beta, and it was certainly very cool, but I never got dedicated to it, and I've yet to play, like, the full finished version on any console or on the PC, but I do know it's very good, and personally, I love Blizzard, because I'm a huge Diablo fan, and I very much enjoy StarCraft as well, so I love what those guys have the potential to do. And seeing how popular and successful Overwatch has been, and how strong the community really seems to be, when you consider them wanting to bring that to Nintendo's brand new platform, where they really have never worked with Nintendo, that would be extremely exciting, and I think potentially very beneficial for all parties involved. Beneficial for Nintendo, beneficial for Blizzard, and Overwatch as a title, and then of course beneficial to us, the gamers. Now, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong about this, I think the only time any Blizzard title has ever appeared on a Nintendo console, I want to say would have been, was it the first Diablo on the Nintendo 64? I am 90% sure that that exists, that did happen, and I do know it wasn't supposed to be very good. I remembered playing the PS1 version of that when it was brand new, after having already played a lot of the PC version, and even the PS1 version was garbage, and that was on a disc system, so I can't imagine the N64's cartridge ran that very well. But anyway, the point is, I really don't think that there's been a whole lot of Blizzard-Nintendo crossover in the past, so to think about them bringing Overwatch is pretty cool. Now, they haven't confirmed it, but they had a couple of quotes, and there's a whole bunch of quotes. I'll even link this article below for you guys to read if you haven't already heard it. But the only thing that I wanted to kind of quote to you guys and discuss as far as if Blizzard sees it even being feasible to bring the game to the Nintendo Switch is this one quote from, looks like Overwatch director Jeff Kaplan is his name. He says, "I think the problem is we've really targeted our minimum specs in a way that we would have to revisit performance and how to get on that platform." So of all the quotes, like I said, that's the one that kind of stuck out to me. Because what he's basically saying is it could very well and potentially be not so much the power of the Switch, because I do believe that there exists the ability to optimize and compress certain data to make most games run in some sort of feasible, appropriate way on the Switch. Even if obviously a lot of certain graphical fidelities and tricks and stuff aren't going to be possible on the Switch, I mean, you've got a system that's quite a bit more capable than the 360, PS3, and Wii U, so you'd have to think that, you know, they could probably make a game like Overwatch even run on those consoles. Why wouldn't it run on the Switch? I'm sure it's possible. But he basically is saying in kind of the nicest way possible that, well, the Switch still is less powerful than the average PC, than the PS4 and the Xbox One, and that does pose some sort of hurdle for us, and the fact that they'd have to go back and probably completely retool the current version of Overwatch to make it run on the Switch. So I get that, and that's a totally fair thing to say. They go on to say other things like, you know, we'd have to create this whole third platform to be able to patch and to be able to update and make DLC and stuff available in the future, because we have the Sony and PlayStation and PC ecosystems down. The Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch ecosystem would be a brand new thing, so that element of our business model would have to we'd have to make a new team to be able to handle that stuff. And stuff that does make sense, but the kind of thing that to me really doesn't seem like as big of a hurdle as this initial quote that I just read to you. But I do know that they go on to say, you know, we know that the fan base might be there. We're always willing to look at any sort of platform that might make a title we have successful. And they recognize the fact that at any given time, they might find a reason to make any of their games work on any platform, such as the Nintendo Switch. So again, it's all a bunch of very nicely worded PR speak to ultimately say, if we feel like it makes sense, if we feel like the market's there, if we think that the system sells enough and the demand seems strong enough, which it does kind of seem very strong, people were talking about Overwatch on the Switch almost since day one, that they would be willing to consider doing it. So it's just a matter of if they can find a way to make the game run at an acceptable level to make it worthwhile on the Switch. And when you think about that game running on the Switch and being portable with this huge online competitive sort of culture it has, in the same way that I think Destiny could work with the online cooperative nature of that game in a portable machine, I think that there's a real opportunity there for Overwatch to be very successful, like I said, on the Nintendo Switch. So if it makes sense, who really knows? Will it ever happen? I wouldn't put a whole lot of money on it, but I do like that they give us a lot of reason to think that you never know, maybe it could happen. And really quickly, I want to talk about one last Nintendo-related piece of news today, and that was about a week ago, Eiji Aonuma, who we all know, the super awesome dude from Nintendo who's directing all these fantastic Zelda games, including that one title called Breath of the Wild. he had some quotes about the potential future of Zelda and how Breath of the Wild might be influencing it, and I thought this was really, really interesting, and I was super excited to talk about this. So ultimately, what happened is, in an interview with, I think, IGN Japan, he and a couple of other folks from Nintendo basically said, you know, we really like the open world thing for Breath of the Wild. It seems like people and reviewers are really liking it, and it could very well potentially be the future for Zelda, at least for the foreseeable future, for maybe the next handful of titles. They would be looking at pretty much continuing this huge open-ended open world sandbox type of experience. Very, very interesting stuff. I'm going to read for you the one quote that I wanted to kind of snag from this interview, and I think the English is pretty broken, and it's definitely a rough translation, but I think that I can kind of decipher it enough that we can discuss it. Ultimately, here's what he said. From now on, this will probably be the standard form. However, eventually, that in itself could become seen as Zelda as usual, and we would start to hear opinions this way and that way. This has always been the case, and the result of what we've made is Zelda. So, again, it's just a kind of a really bad translation from IGN Japan, I think, but you can still kind of ultimately gather what he's saying, and he's really saying, you know, we like what we did. It seems successful, like I was saying. It seems like everyone liked it. All these opinions seem to be very positive. They help us shape and influence where Zelda might need to go in the future. And this was a change that we feel really comfortable with, adding this sandbox open world to Zelda. So we're going to probably look at continuing it for a while. And I have to say that, to me, there's actually good and bad with that, guys. I'm not going to lie. But it's far more good. It's far more good in the sense that right now the sandbox thing for a Zelda universe is new. Sandbox games and awesome open world games are not new. So Zelda and Breath of the Wild did not make this a new thing. But what they did is they became the best version of that kind of gameplay, and that's fantastic. And of course, like I said, when you look at this kind of gameplay in a Zelda game, it was new as of Breath of the Wild. This is a new thing that we're all enjoying right now. So I like the idea of, while it still feels new, maybe using it as sort of the foundation of the template for the next couple of Zelda games. I think that could be great. Nintendo has obviously shown that they can knock that idea out of the frickin' park, out of the stratosphere, into the next galaxy, like they did so freaking well with Breath of the Wild and the open world feel there. So that stuff is all really good and exciting to me, and I want to see that continue, especially with the different setting and maybe a couple of different art styles and graphical styles and different versions of Link and Zelda and these characters. And if the next couple of Zelda games using the open world sort of engine thing are different from Breath of the Wild, I want everyone to be different the way they've been previously. I don't want 3 games that look and play and feel just like Breath of the Wild. I want them to be different. And if they do that, it's going to be fantastic. The one thing I would say, and why I said there's some bad in that respects to me, is Breath of the Wild is like the most amazing game ever. It might be the best game I've ever played. I'm going to make a video discussing that soon. Regardless of that, I definitely feel like it's a 10 out of 10. That's without question. That being said, as much as I love it, there are a lot of tropes and things that we're used to from previous Zelda games that I do miss. There are some things from the old Zelda formula that some people might have grown tired of or wanted to see go away completely, and I understand, but there's a couple of things that I do miss, and playing through Breath of the Wild, which I'm almost done with, still not yet, it's like I do miss those every once in a while, and I don't want to go into the fine details of those, but ultimately, a lot of the things that made Zelda what it was did have to go away to make Breath of the Wild the amazing masterpiece that it is. And so I want some of those things to kind of start to come back and creep their way back into the Zelda games and the Zelda universe in future titles. You know, I'm willing to let it slide for like another game or two after Zelda. I mean, we're talking about 10 years. Within 10 years, we're going to have probably 2 more games. So it really could be a while before we start to see that come back. But, you know, I just don't want to see some of the best things that I think even the older Zelda games have done go away forever just because Breath of the Wild was so good. I still think that there's a place and home for some of the elements of previous games, specifically like the dungeon crawling. Like, I love the shrines so much in Breath of the Wild. It's one of my favorite things, but I do think that there's still a place for the older style of dungeon. I don't mind being stuck in this brand new, huge dungeon that I've been trying to get to forever, and being stuck in there for hours or an hour or two, you know? The Divine Beasts are great, but I want the more advanced, more elaborate version of that. And also the dungeon discovery and just kind of what it represents to finally get yourself to a dungeon. All this stuff. I mean, the whole formula is something that I do miss and I would love to see come back. So, Anyway, my opinion aside, I just thought that this was pretty interesting news, a pretty interesting quote, and I do think it's giving us a good glimpse into what's going to happen with Zelda in the future. And Breath of the Wild really is that big of a deal and is making this kind of an impact on one of the biggest and best and most successful and lauded franchises in video game history. That's how impactful this one game is to this one franchise. So, I don't know, I think that it'll be interesting to see really what even this very next Zelda will turn out to be. So that's it, guys. A couple of pretty interesting and exciting stories surrounding Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch. Is Overwatch going to come? What's going to happen with all these Square Enix games? It's really nice to see their support of the Nintendo Switch. And Zelda might be open world for at least the next 10 or 15 years, man. I mean, if you go based on the typical Zelda release schedule, it's probably like 10 or 15 years just to get the next 2 or 3 Zelda games out. So it'll be really interesting to see, as it usually is with me. So that's it. Discuss these ideas and these stories and all this information and news below. Definitely curious to hear your guys' thoughts. But of course, that's it for me. Thanks as always for tuning in. This is Rob of Rule of 2 Review, and I will of course catch you guys all next time on another video.